if you're facing two decisions, gene therapy and marriage, marriage is the easier decision because you can get married more than once and you can change your mind about marriage. You can't do either of those currently with gene therapy.
When the promise of groundbreaking therapy is real, how do you weigh hope, risk, and the potential to change everything? Today, we're exploring gene therapy, looking at the decisions patients face and the role of advocacy in shaping outcomes. Guiding us through these conversations is Brian O'Mahony, Chief Executive of the Irish Hemophilia Society. Born with severe hemophilia B, Brian took the brave step to undergo gene therapy firsthand, offering a unique lens on how patients navigate uncertainty when new treatments emerge. This perspective is highly relevant to the SADS community as gene-based therapies continue to develop. Understanding the risks, benefits, and future implications of these therapies is essential, a challenge Brian has experienced firsthand. Please welcome Brian O'Mahony. Hi, Brian, and welcome to Let's Talk SADS Live.
Thank you.
I'm calling you from Toronto, and you are in lovely Dublin. You are our first truly international guest. We have interviewed someone from the States, but we really feel off our continent is truly international. I suffer from a SADS condition, and you suffer from hemophilia. I don't know if suffer is actually the right word we even want to use. I live with, and I'm sure that you might have your own words. I think what the commonality that we might have with our communities is that these are life-threatening conditions that can really impact the quality of someone's life. And the promise now is gene therapy. So I'd love to get your, firstly, your background on yourself and your condition, and then we can move into this brave decision that you took to receive gene therapy treatment.
Okay. Well, hello, Toronto. I think I have hemophilia B. There are two types of hemophilia, A and B. And hemophilia really is where one of the many clotting factors that work together to make a blood clot is not there or is there in tiny amounts, so your blood doesn't clot. Think of blood clotting as like a bicycle chain. You've got to have every link. If one link is missing, the chain doesn't work. So this basically is where the link is missing. So without treatment, you get bleeding into joints and muscles. You get external bleeding, but joints and muscles are really bad because the swelling and the pain and the damage is internalized, and you can't actually stop bleeding inside a knee. You can stop a nosebleed. And then you also get life-threatening bleeds, and without treatment, quality of life is very poor. Life expectancy is very low. Now, we've had treatment available since the 70s, and it's basically giving injections of the missing clotting factor. Most people with hemophilia miss factor 8. The second most common type miss factor 9. That's the type I have. So from the 70s, you could start taking injections of the missing clotting factors. Unfortunately, in the 80s and early 90s and the 70s, a lot of these were made from large pools of plasma. Many of the pools were contaminated with hepatitis B or C or HIV. So it wiped out an entire generation of people with hemophilia, to the extent that, in most of the countries where we had treatment, including Canada, including Ireland, the vast majority of deaths in the last 40 years have been due to the treatment. Now, in the last, from the mid-80s onwards, we started having safer treatment, and then from the mid-90s, synthetic recombinant factors. And then the last 10 or 15 years, we've had an explosion of new therapies. So you now have factors that last longer in the blood, which means taking them less often, give you more protection. We have subcutaneous treatments. We have a new generation of treatment called rebalancing agents, which rather than replace the missing clotting factor, actually put the brakes on one of your naturally occurring anticoagulants, so it comes at clotting from the other side. And finally, we have gene therapy. Now, people have been working on hemophilia gene therapy for well over 20 years, and we had a couple licensed in the last 2 years. So they're now options. I grew up with hemophilia. Hemophilia is a genetic inherited condition. So I grew up with severe hemophilia. My brother has severe hemophilia. I had 2 older brothers whom I never met because they died of bleeding in childhood. I had 4 uncles, several cousins, so quite a large family history with hemophilia. And really, life was very, very tough growing up because we had no treatment, and it was like Russian roulette in terms of would you survive, because if you got a life-threatening bleed, there was no treatment. From my teenage years, treatment started becoming available, quite rudimentary. And then when I moved to Dublin to go to college, treatment was available, and you could actually treat yourself at home. So it switched from a no treatment to pretty poor hospital-based treatment to being able to treat at home. And then for many years, the standard treatment was, and in many countries remains, if you feel a bleed is starting in your elbow or knee or ankle, you go to the refrigerator, you take out the treatment, you make it up, and then you infuse it intravenously. So the treatment was intravenous infusions. And then for many people, the optimum treatment was prophylaxis, where you took that a couple of times a week to prevent bleeding. So the whole process moved to trying to prevent bleeding. And that was the case. And treatments were getting better and better. So it became a condition you could certainly live with and have a good quality of life with, and do many of the normal activities. Now, obviously, somebody my age, when I grew up without treatment, I've got some damage to my joints. I've got one fused ankle, I've got one knee replaced, I've got arthritis in my elbow, but I'm in pretty good shape. And certainly the younger people now with hemophilia are not having those problems. So do you want me to go on to gene therapy?
Yeah, just pause there and say just again about these commonalities between our two communities. I think same trajectory in the SAS community. If you look back into my family, my grandmother died suddenly at 38. There were no treatments when I was first diagnosed other than some beta blockers, but certainly no internal cardiac defibrillators to shock the heart back into a normal rhythm. So really, when you say Russian roulette, I mean, we have also lived through those conditions too. So I think it's very interesting, the parallel that the patient groups have
And I think the other thing is people live with this all their lives, and if you either sink or swim, and if you can swim, if you can deal with this, you develop great resilience.
Yes.
And there's also definitely a disability paradox. We've published on this. So if you're doing quality of life surveys, and if you take a 40-year-old man with severe hemophilia who's got joint damage, and you do a quality of life survey, he'll actually score quite high, because you get used to a certain amount of pain or discomfort. Whereas if you took a perfectly healthy 40-year-old man and magically transposed him into the body of the 40-year-old with hemophilia, he'd score terribly. He'd be in a lot of pain. As an example, before my knee replacement, if I woke up in the morning and my knee wasn't in pain, I knew I was still asleep. So you just got used to a certain amount of this. That I think a lot of us have pretty high pain thresholds. We've certainly got resilience, because if you don't, you really get swamped by this. And I think a good attitude is, if and when you have a bleeding episode, you deal with that, you do what you need to do. And then when you don't have, stop thinking about it, get on with things.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm sure it's probably the same with SADS, that you have to get on with your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mindset is everything. And also having a lot of gratitude about things you can enjoy and do. So, there's a joke that said it was a brave man who ate the first oyster. I understand you might have been the first person. Now, were you the first person in Ireland to receive gene therapy in any disease, or the first person with hemophilia?
As far as I'm aware, certainly the big national centre now is the clinical research facility in the biggest hospital. I was the first person there to get any gene therapy, and obviously the first person to get hemophilia gene therapy. So the background to that was they started developing hemophilia gene therapies about 25 years ago, and they were coming up against a couple of obstacles that they couldn't fix. Now, it's all about having a decent level of the missing clotting factor, mictase factor 9. So with the earlier gene therapies, they were injecting this directly into the hepatic artery. They were trying skeletal muscle, and they were either finding that they couldn't get any sort of decent factor level, and even if they did, it wouldn't last. There was no durability on it. And then they started using an AAV, adeno-associated viral vector, because of course viruses are a great delivery system. If you want to, hence viral infections. If you want to get something into the body, a virus is a good delivery system for that. So they started working on these AAV viral vector based gene therapies. Now, Ireland's a small country. Typically, we were not part of the large clinical trials because companies thought we were too small. I spoke to a lot of companies. about 10 to 15 years ago and talked to them about our system. We've got a very well organized system of centres, networks, national register, very well organized patient organization where we work with the centres. So there's a lot of added value in bringing a trial here. So companies started listening and coming over. So we've had all the new therapies coming here in clinical trials. And over the last 10, 12 years, I persuaded a couple of the gene therapy companies to come to Ireland, and they'd come over. I'd bring together 20 patients with the clinician and the company. We'd have a discussion, because that way you start to gauge, is there any interest in this, or what do people think? And they get to ask questions. So I was following the science very closely. And in the course of following the science, and as I saw the various trials progressing, I I came to the opinion that for me personally, the risk benefit ratio here was positive, that I'd like to try this. And that there were a couple of the trials that didn't go ahead, that I wasn't eligible for. And then the last one came up, and I decided, again, we'd been talking about this for several years. Nobody had jumped. So I decided to jump and take part in the trial. And obviously it's the phase 2B had just finished. So I was basing my decision on the outcome on 3 patients, just 3, because that was all that was there before the phase 3. But all 3 had a fairly steady factor 9 level. And I thought, this to me was worth the risk. I thought on balance it was a good thing. And but certainly, you're taking this gene therapy. As soon as you take the gene therapy, your antibody titer to the AAV vector goes through the roof, so you can never take it again. So it's a one-off. You know that. You can only get this once. There's no way of telling if you'll be one of those for whom it doesn't work. There's no way of telling what factor expression you get. It could be extremely high and dangerous. It could remain unchanged or very low, or anywhere in between. There's no telling about short-term and long-term safety impacts. So short-term, quite a few people have to use steroids. Long-term, you'd worry about the risk of insertional mutagenesis and a theoretical cancer risk. So there are all these factors. There's also, of course, the whole point about affordability and in various countries. So I looked at all of these, and the one thing you have to do, you're going in with a therapy which you don't know if it will work for you. You don't know what factor level you'll get. You don't know how long it will last. You don't know if you'll any short-term or long-term safety impacts. So you've got to make a judgment call on that. And you've also got to, I think you have to set your expectations. So I had a clear view in my head of what I wanted. I wasn't going to this thinking, I hope it might work. We'll see. I had clear views on all of these criteria. I knew what factor expression I would like, how long I would like it to last, what impact it should have make on my life. So I had those expectations set, but I was also realistic enough to realize you can't control any of these. So I was also comfortable if they were at the extreme edges. So if I wanted a factor level here and it turned out to be here or here, I wouldn't be as happy with that, but I had to be comfortable with that. Otherwise, there's no point in going into the trial. Not when you can't predict that. Because with any previous therapy, if you took a previous therapy, then if it didn't work, you switch back to another one, or you increase the dose, or you change the frequency. None of this was possible with gene therapy. And in fact, there were only 54 people in the world on this trial, and I was the first one in Ireland. But then we got 2 more from Ireland as well, so we have 3 here out of 54. So the trial actually happened just before COVID, and the gene therapy. It's quite an onerous monitoring and follow-up procedure, certainly for the first year. So you have to go in once a week for bloods in the first year, and then once a week for the first 3 months, and then once every month, and then once after the first year, it's once every 6 months. So it's not too bad. But it was a lot of visits, and I travel a lot for work, and a lot of my pre-discussions were with the research nurse, looking at schedules and, okay, can we do that Wednesday because I'm supposed to be in Milan on Tuesday? And then all of that went away because of COVID. So I had no travel for 2 years, which frankly, I really enjoyed. I loved the break from the travel. It also meant I could fully commit to the gene therapy. Now, let me be clear. I would have fully committed to that anyway. I was going to keep with the schedule and give myself the best possible chance of a good outcome. So if it meant I couldn't go to the meetings, that's fine. That's a sacrifice I was prepared to make. But it was a little strange because 10 days after I had my gene therapy, the country was shut down with COVID. Nobody was going near hospitals, and yet I was going to the hospital twice a week at that point.
Wow.
But they managed it very well because I was going to a non-clinical area and they saw me there and took the bloods there. Interestingly, I increased my visits from once a week, twice per week at my own suggestion, because one of the things they do, and the reason some people have to take steroids, is the gene therapy heads for your liver.
Yeah.
And so it goes into the hepatocytes, and you're hoping the hepatocytes will start making some factor. But of course, this isn't a foreign body going to your liver, and quite honestly, the liver reacts in many cases, gets a bit inflamed, and thinks, okay, there's something here. We gotta sort this out. Not major liver damage, but it gets a bit of inflammation. The problem is not the inflammation, not liver damage. It's the fact that inflammation can kill off those specific cells which have not got the gene therapy in them. So you could lose all your expression. So if you start getting any inflammation, you have to act quickly. And I didn't think once a week was enough for those bloods, so I went in voluntarily twice a week. I also had expectations on, why I wanted gene therapy. I'd set my decision drivers clearly in my head. I was hoping for a nice steady level of factor 9 expression, which would mean I could stop taking the intravenous infusions every 10 days. I was hoping for that higher level to give me less chronic pain in my damaged joints. I wanted to be more physically active. I was hoping for, a little bit more, a little bit of a mental health improvement, because I'm not dealing with all of these constant injections and scheduling of your treatment. Also I was 62 at the time, and I thought it could be several more years until this is licensed and available and reimbursable. And at that stage, I might well be over 65, and I don't know if they'll reimburse it. So that was a factor. And the final factor was, I thought, you know what? I'm 62. I've had severe hemophilia my whole life. You get one go around on the merry-go-round. Maybe I should try life without severe hemophilia and see what it's like. So they were my reasons. Thankfully, the gene therapy worked really well for me. But if it hadn't worked really well, I still think I would have been okay, because I thought this through carefully. So when we're talking to people now, and I'm talking to our members who are considering gene therapy, and I'm doing workshops with them and discussions, I'm not an advocate for gene therapy. I'm very careful. Just because I had gene therapy doesn't mean that I'm suddenly an evangelist for this. You should all have this. It's for selected people. But what I'm very keen on is that each of them makes a fully informed personal decision given their own circumstances, their life, their activities, their goals, their career, their travel, their family, their social life. What we want to avoid is treatment remorse, where somebody has this and then says, oh, it didn't work out, and I wish I'd known that beforehand. You can't know it beforehand.
Right.
So I think we're very keen on shared decision making. We're very keen on educating people, giving them as much information as they need to make a fully informed decision for themselves. And sometimes if you go through these processes, they realize, you know what, this is not for me, or maybe that other new treatment might hold more promise. I've had some of the parents of the teenagers with hemophilia coming up to me and saying, we're delighted you're on gene therapy. And I'd say, why? Because we can see how you get on, and then we can make a decision for our kids later. That's a great attitude. I mean, that's, you don't always need to rush to be the first.
Right.
But it's been a good process.
So give me a sense of what you were dealing with before this, because I think I'm thinking of my own self. Mm-hmm. I can manage what my condition is with prescription drugs and interventions with the ICD when needed, and lifestyle choices. And I know what that is. Like, I'm very well versed. I was 21 years old when I was first diagnosed, and I'm going to be turning 58 soon. So you get a level of comfort just dealing with what you know. So I'm just wondering, where were you prior to this? And was, that's a big leap to go from what you know to this irreversible decision to what you don't know. So just talk to me about the before and then how you got into the after.
As I said, in childhood, I didn't have any treatment. And typically, in a typical year, I had 30 to 40 bleeds into joints or muscles. Extremely painful, swelling, heat, pain, and then they leave damage in the joints. So that was a pretty tough way to have to live. I'd missed quite a lot of school, and I had to work really hard to keep up and catch up. As I got into adulthood and moved to Dublin and treatment got better, you'd still have several bleeds a year. You might have 6, 8, 10, and you're on treatment. Then later on, as I went on this preventive treatment, that number decreased. And then as treatments got better, that number decreased again. So I didn't take gene therapy because I was getting a lot of bleeding episodes. My annual bleeding rate, which was 30 to 40 when I was a child, was 0 to 1. So I was getting really good treatment. So that wasn't my motivation. First of all, I wanted to encourage the innovation. I think people need this as an option. Secondly, even, all the bleeds I had over the years had caused some joint damage, which causes chronic pain. Thought it might be nice to get rid of some of that chronic pain. I won't benefit from the mental health improvement that many people would because of my job. I run the Irish Hemophilia Society. I was president of the World Organization based in Montreal and also a European organization. My phone is going 7 days a week with calls from people with hemophilia. So I'm not going to get a big mental health break from that. I understood that beforehand. But I do get a little bit of a break from not having to put too much time into my own hemophilia treatment. So my life was pretty good. My life was pretty good. My bleeding rate was low. I was coping very well with my hemophilia. The treatment every 10 days is a bit annoying. And if I was traveling, you have to bring a lot of stuff with you. But, generally I thought this is worth trying. I like the science here. I think this is good. So I guess I did take a risk with it. On the other hand, if it doesn't work, you can go back to your previous treatment. You're not cutting off that angle. It just means that if it didn't work, I'd never be able to have another gene therapy. And that was fine. I understood that. Beforehand. The key to me, though, was to make sure you know what you're getting into and make sure you've thought it through properly. Now, I think the 3 people here who've had the gene therapy, we've all done very well. We've all got really good factor 9 expressions. But it certainly, it has improved my quality of life. It's lovely being able to travel without, when I travel, I'm kind of throwing clothes into a suitcase very quickly. But then what takes time are all the plugs and chargers and cables we need to travel now, right? And all the factor and medications. That's gone now. I don't need that. Just the plugs and chargers. If I can get a gene therapy for plugs and chargers, I'd take that as well. But it's made it easier to travel in that sense. I've certainly got less pain in my chronically damaged joints, but part of that was also due to 2 years of no travel. I was able to get into a better exercise regime because I was constantly on airplanes before that. As I said, mental health wise, I've freed up some time in the hard drive in my head which I was having to use for my own hemophilia. Things like, okay, I'm taking a long haul flight tomorrow, but my prophylaxis is today. I should put it off and take it in the morning before I get on a 10-hour flight. You're thinking these things all the time. Oh, I'm going to the gym on Wednesday. Oh, my prophylaxis is Thursday. Maybe I better do it on Thursday. So these things almost subconsciously, they're taking up quite a bit of your time,
Right. Absolutely. Talk to me a bit about the irreversibility of this. You advise some young people about this. What do you tell them?
Well, when I'm talking I've had young men coming in saying, oh, gene therapy, 1 injection and that's it. I never have to go near the hospital again. I like the sound of that. And I'm pointing out, first of all, do you have any idea how many visits you have to make in the first year? You will never have been visiting the hospital as much in any previous year of your life for the first year. In terms of irreversibility, it's a big decision. So what I say to the young men is, look, if you're facing 2 decisions, gene therapy and marriage, marriage is the easier decision because you can get married more than once and you can change your mind about marriage. You can't do either of those currently with gene therapy. So it is a big decision. I mean, when I've been talking to people here I talk to them individually and in small groups, and I'm doing workshops in the States on this next week. We talk to them, and I ask them things like, okay, what problems are you currently having? What treatment options do you currently have? What problems are you currently having? What do you think gene therapy will do for you that the other therapies won't? What are your current goals and activities and career and travel? And what can you not do that you'd reasonably like to be able to do? Now, if somebody says boxing or cage fighting, no, that's not going to work. But if they say, look, I'd like to be able to cycle or swim or, run after my kids in the park or work or not miss work, there's lots of things. And so I think they need to think through what this could do for them if it worked, what their other treatment options are. And of course, that varies enormously depending on the country in the world you're in. I mean, let me give you an example. If you had a gene therapy which gives you quite a low factor level only for a couple of years, that would not be of interest to us. But for somebody with hemophilia in India, they'd bite your hand off to get that, because it's still much better than the current therapeutic options they have. So a lot depends on how does this compare to your other therapies.
Right. Gotcha. And then you made a good point about when to take it, because you said that you'd made the decision to have gene therapy recently, but some people may choose to delay it because new treatments might come and you can only do this once.
Yes.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, you can take gene therapy once. Now, we don't know how long it lasts, but for the main type of hemophilia, actually, it was looking like it would only last 5 to 7 years. And then the company stopped marketing it except for 3 countries, and now they have withdrawn it from the market altogether. I think so. The main type of hemophilia A no longer has a licensed and available gene therapy. I think one of the reasons is because it was only lasting 5 to 7 years. It's a lot to go through in the first year for a potential benefit only for 5 to 7 years. And there was a huge amount of variability as well in the factor expression, and about 80% of the people needed steroids for up to 5 months. Factor 9 is different. It looks like it's going to last at least 10 years, maybe 25 years, maybe more. There isn't as much variability, and a much lower proportion of people need steroids. So I think that they're all part of the decision process people have to take. For steroids for 5 months is not a pleasant thing to have to do. They can have a lot of side effects themselves, But in terms of the age, let's say you're going to take a gene therapy and you're assuming it'll last at least 10 years. Now, when do you take that? When you hit the age of 18 and you're eligible for gene therapy, do you want the next 10 years for gene therapy when you have little or no bleeds and you get lots of sport and activities and maybe backpacking around Asia, whatever? Do you want it in your late 20s to late 30s where maybe you're getting into a relationship, you might be having young children? 40s, your career is taking off, maybe your kids are there, you want to do things with them. 50s, you've got some joint damage perhaps in the past, but you optimize your activity levels. And 60s, well, you've got some joint damage, but you'd like a break from all the treatment burden. It depends on the individual. It depends on where they are at the time. I think in an ideal world, the ideal candidate for hemophilia gene therapy would be a newborn baby with severe hemophilia, and you give it to them then, and it would last a lifetime. Now, of course, you can't give gene therapy to a child for hemophilia because the liver is still immature until at least the age of 13 to 15. So if you give them gene therapy targeting the liver, which these do, then as the liver cells start their normal turnover in children, you lose the gene therapy. So you'd have to give them a massive dose, which would be dangerous.
Yeah.
Now, I think they get it down to age 15, but probably not below that. It depends on the individual. And you have to say to people, look, if you could pick 10 years of your life, let's say it lasts for at least 10 years, which 10 years would you choose? Now, yeah, in a sense, it's an almost foolish question, because you can't say, oh, I'll pick my 20s. Yeah, but you're 52. So you can't go backwards, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's also hard. It's going to be hard for a 20-year-old to think, well, how do I know what I want when I'm 40? So I think when we've seen the people who've taken the licensed gene therapy, it's a mixture of ages from 60s right down to 18, and I think it depends. So it depends on each individual and what their life is. And I think the nice thing that this has enabled as well, and the other new therapies in the last 10 years, it's changed the conversation. So in the past, you went in once or twice a year for your checkup, and they'd say, okay, you're on this treatment now. How are you getting on? What problems are you having? How many bleeds have you had? What can't you do? What are your concerns? Now you go in and it's more conversations, more like, okay, obviously I'll cover how many bleeds you've had, but how are you getting on with your life? What about your career, your study, travel, sports, activities? What would you like to be able to do that you currently can't do? And which treatment option would be best to allow for that? So it's just turned it on its head in a very nice and very positive way.
Much more holistic, and now there's more options.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
I don't like gardening, so I've never really gardened, and I've always used my hemophilia as an excuse. But I've told my wife that it's still quite dangerous for people who've had gene therapy to do gardening. So you have to maintain the ability not to do things you don't like doing.
That's right. You could still use it as an excuse.
Exactly.
You have been a strong advocate, it sounds like, for decades now and leading multiple organizations. What is that advocacy meant to you personally, and how has it helped your mental health? And what do you believe it's given other people?
Well, I guess I did my fellowship exams in clinical biochemistry in 1982, and I just completed my exams. I've been studying for 7 years. I got married the previous year. My uncle was on the board of the Irish Hemophilia Society, and he approached me and asked me to come on the board for 1 year, maybe two. He said, "Look, you're a young man. You understand some of the science. Can you come on the board for a year? I promise you no more than two." And I'm still there, 44 years later. And I would have done the 2 years and left and had done my piece. It was a very small organization, not very active. But what happened, of course, 6 months after I joined was HIV. And the community was devastated. And I was very fortunate. I didn't get HIV. But a lot of my friends and people I knew did. And I was angered by the government's lack of response and their lack of empathy with people. So that really set me on the path of advocacy, lobbying. We lobbied very successfully to the extent that I took over as chairman of the organization in 87, and we started the campaign in 89. We brought down the government on this issue. So we've always been very strong advocacy wise. I got very involved in the global organization, and I ran that for 10 years, and then the European organization for 8 years. So as well as giving back to the community, frankly, it has helped me personally enormously, because if you're helping other people with their hemophilia, you're not that concerned about your own. The best way to deal with your hemophilia is to help somebody else who's not coping as well with their hemophilia. You make great friendships, you make great sense of community. I've seen here when people were very, very ill and maybe near the end of their life, the community rallies around, and it's incredible the amount of help and support they get. It's also been, very rewarding to go into many, many countries around the world, meet with the health ministers, make a case for haemophilia care, look at the local setup, the local system, the local culture, being able to work in different cultures in different countries and understand that. There are over 100 countries in the world I can go into and pick up a phone, and I've got friends there. So it's because the hemophilia community is very tight. But really, if you want to, I know my eyes were opened in 84. I went to my first ever World Congress. And of course, intellectually that there's very little treatment in many developing emerging countries. That's one thing. But meeting the people and talking to them about their lived experience and then going to these countries, it's absolutely shattering. So look, I can recall visits to many developing countries when I was president of the World Organization and being absolutely emotionally drained coming home because of the cases you'd seen. But you can't let that wipe you out, because it should make you more determined to help them, to do things. And what we found is that, a week of your time in one of those countries, you can achieve a lot. We brought in some great medical volunteers who realized that as well. If you've got a superb clinician from Canada and you bring him to Bolivia or Botswana for a week, they can do a lot more there in a week than they can in Canada. Because in countries like Canada and Ireland, we've got a really good system, and you're adding a little bit of cream to the top at best. There you're making fundamental differences. So honestly, advocacy and lobbying for the community is really, really important. It's vital. Trying to get countries to move towards sustainable care is vital, but it's very, very good for the development and mental health of the person who's doing that, because you're helping others. And in helping others, you're subconsciously, I think, helping yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think they've shown a happiness index increases when you give. Yeah.
Absolutely.
People who have less give more, paradoxically.
Well, I mean, you go to some of the developing countries, and the kids with hemophilia outside, they're kicking a football around, they're playing soccer, and they're getting on with it. And I think that the nice thing as well, it allows me to empathize with that, because that's what my life was like growing up. We didn't have that treatment, so I've lived that experience.
Yeah.
As somebody who's 25 now from a high-income country, who's never had to suffer through no treatment and lots of bleeding episodes with no analgesia or treatment, you don't have the same empathy. But I think it's and when you talk to people about this and they realize it's also a shared experience you've had in your lives, albeit maybe 30 years or 40 years ago here, that does help, and I think having the condition, having dealt with no treatment for many years, having dealt with the joint damage that's part of that, makes you more effective advocate, but it also means that you connect better with the community in each country. You're a real person to them,
Absolutely.
not just a policy wonk.
Yeah. Brian, this has been a really illuminating conversation. I think it's going to be very helpful for our community members who are beginning to grapple with gene therapy for their own self, a deeply personal decision that you've lived through. Is there any last words that you want to share with us that you think, might help? Any advice that you can give us? Everything you've said so far has been amazing.
Think it through carefully, make an informed decision, write down a list of the pros and cons, and write down a list of your expectations, and then think about what would your reaction be if you don't actually meet all of those expectations. Have some leeway in your mind for that. And in terms of advocacy, rather than waiting around to see if a government will fund something or do something, try and get in the room where decisions are made. Decisions are made by the people in the room. And we've certainly moved to a point here where we're not lobbying government to do things. We're in the room with them, making decisions on these areas. And that's really important. I don't like government or payers handing us decisions. We like to be in the room when the decisions are made. And that's really important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for your time today. And we wish you best of health.
Okay, best of luck. Take care. Bye-bye.